Hey guys, this is part 2 of my Fire Mage guide, 2 out of 3. And in this one I really wanted to just talk about some concepts, what to expect when you're playing the spec, the cadence of the spec, and just common questions that I get asked about Fire that I think a lot of people may not be doing correctly basically. So to start off, we have this general opener setup, right? You're always going to do this. And if you don't understand what this looks like or the first combustion, you should check out my first video already. But after you do this first combustion, after it's done, you're gonna have this little bit of a filler. And in my experience, it tends to be that you can typically sync up your second combustion and your SKB that's right after the first one as well. So the way you do this is usually after you finish your initial combustion, you're gonna have let's say 4 to 5 stacks of SKB, usually 5, and you're gonna have your combustion within 30 seconds. It's typically pretty easy to essentially not hit 8 stacks too quickly in this time, and then get your shifting power, come back, and then you can shifting and then go into your combustion, if that makes sense. And the real benefit of that is just you generate your charges back, and then you can do your pyroblast into combustion like you see on the screen here. Not like that, but in the same sequence, except without the death. That was my first time playing Fire, so a little bit of an oopsie. But yeah. And then after that, you're going into this quote unquote filler / maintenance rotation, right? But typically I see the fight as this sequence. So you have your opener, you have your first combust, you have a little bit of a filler until your second shifting power, and then it's you're combining your SKB into your second bust, and then it's the rest, right? As for the rest, some few concepts that I should probably talk about, some FAQs. The first one is feel the burn, also known as Blaster Master. People ask how do I maintain this? What do I do? I'm doing something wrong, I'm dropping it or whatever. Few things. So for Blaster Master, I'll call it Blaster Master instead of feel the burn. You basically don't give a shit about it. It's not really relevant outside your combust. You should definitely not maintain it outside your combust. It's just you want your fire blast charges for your actual combustion, because those lead to more pyroblasts. It's you're spending more GCDs casting pyroblast in combust, and that's way more valuable than maintaining a 12% damage buff, right? Or anything like that. The only exception to this, however, is if you already have 2 to 3 stacks, and you're casting a Pyroclasm, outside of combust, it's completely okay, in my opinion, to refresh it. You could even force a double fire blast just to make sure that the Pyroclasm is buffed. My logic behind this is that basically you're powering up a strong ability. As long as you're not losing much outside of your combust, it should be fine. You're just going to be a bit slower on the stacks moving forward, but empowering your Pyroclasm is probably good. As for Rune of Power, how do we use Rune of Power in this rotation? So, at baseline level, what people say is your Rune of Power typically goes into your SKB, right? So you Rune of Power and then you do an SKB sequence. While that's true, and that is the best time oftentimes to use it, there are situations where you want to use your Rune of Power in the middle of combust. The idea is basically if you can get more out of your Rune of Power if you use it in the current combust than you do if you held it for an SKB, then you should do that instead. So for example, if we say SKB is 6 seconds long, which it is, then as long as there's 7 seconds left of combust, then you can rune, and then by the time rune ends, rune's cast time ends, you're gonna have 6 seconds of combust. So it's neutral, right? And then you get it out of the way as well. You put it on cooldown. While that's a good rule of thumb, I think that there's something important to keep in mind when we're playing Mage, because we have Lust and Double Lust and things like that, right? Where instead of just looking at it as time in seconds, oftentimes it's good to look at it in terms of GCDs. So if you have my weak aura package or any weak aura package that can decipher the number of GCDs in the buffs, you'll know, for example, that in your SKB you have 6 GCDs, right? And well, let's say, so you can say, okay, well, I have 6 GCDs, so I want 6 GCDs out of my rune in combust. But in double lust, sometimes you can fit more than 6 GCDs in a shorter amount of time. You might be able to fit 8 GCDs in 5 seconds instead, right? Just because you have so much haste. So in this sense, duration is not really it doesn't grasp the concept we want. What we're really tracking is this kind of this thing that's based off of GCDs instead of seconds. Just a note on that. Next up is Pyroclasm usage, which I think is quite an advanced topic in my opinion, but it's not too hard once you get used to it. It's just one that's like quite often misplayed. Typically, the goal of Pyroclasm is we want it to sync up with our SKB Pyros, right? Because if you think about it, we're going to need to hardcast a Pyroblast for Pyroclasm, but we also need to hardcast a Pyroblast for SKB. Now, you could do like those in two separate hardcasts, right? Like that sometimes will happen. But the reality is, why should we hardcast a Pyroblast that's going to do 10k damage for our SKB when instead we can line it up with our Pyroclasm? Now, this does not mean that we only cast Pyroclasms for SKB. It's just the idea that if we don't lose anything, we should save Pyroclasms for SKB. The way we achieve this is simple. Essentially, you get a weak aura or something that, or like some muscle memory that allows you to know how long can you stall your Pyroclasm before you can need to start casting it. So, on my UI, I have a little number over my Pyroclasm proc that basically just tells me, hey, you need to start casting in this amount of time to get it off in time. So you can see over here, it's like this 8, 7, 6. This tells me I need to start casting it, and it accounts for like how many stacks I have too. But yeah, like you basically want to stall casting your Pyroclasm until as late as possible without losing it, without any chance of losing it. And also, like, when you hit 2 stacks, you need to just cast it because you don't want to waste it. That's typically how it's going to work. If you just stall your Pyroclasm as much as possible, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to have a Pyroclasm for your SKB every single time. It's not just a fire and forget ability, unfortunately. You do need to think about it, right? But that's kind of where the difficulty comes in. As for Incombust, Pyroclasm Incombust is very powerful, and it's still good to do. You should still hardcast Pyros in Combust, but the same rule applies, right? You're going to be shitting out SKBs throughout the fight in a Combust. So having Pyroclasms lined up for that is also still very powerful. So we need to not forget that. Same concept applies, right? And lastly, if you have a Pyroclasm that, it'll kind of automatically happen, but starting Combusts with Pyroclasm is obviously very powerful. If you like hardcast a Pyro and then press Combust at the end of it, I typically am okay delaying my combustion 1 or 2 seconds if it allows me to do that, right? Because delaying 1 to 2 seconds of your Combust, but getting essentially 3 extra seconds, because you're not going to be casting hardcast Pyro, Pyroclasm, and Combust for 3 seconds, that's a gain, right? It's a significant gain. The last one, or one of the last ones, I guess, is kind of like how to manage SKB. The main thing is, well, there's 2 main concepts. One is what I call SKB Prep, which is just, setting yourself to be successful in your SKB sequence. Typically, that just means managing your Fire Blast charges. The rule I like to go with is basically, when you're at 6 stacks, never cast Fire Blast until you have more than 1 charge. So essentially, wait until you have 1 point something charges, if you're at 6 stacks of SKB. And if you're at 7 stacks of SKB, don't cast Fire Blasts until you have more than 2 charges, right? Basically, what that will do is, let's say, imagine you're at 7, you want to wait until you're at, let's say, hypothetically, 2.5 charges, and then you can convert to your 8th stack. The reason we do this is because you basically need Fire Blast charges for your SKB. An SKB that lacks Fire Blast charges is going to be weak, because we have a small window of time where we can actually pump out Pyro, 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 after each other. Not in that sequence, but you know what I mean. So banking your Fire Blast charges is a very, very, very crucial part of maximizing our SKB windows. It will get very basic as you play more. It's something that's going to be super intuitive, but yeah, just something important to know. And the very last thing is basically syncing up SKB with Combust. Now, the way combustion works is when you press the actual Combust button, it will set your character to have 12 seconds of Combust duration. Now, you might ask, why am I saying it in such a weird way? Why am I saying set it to 12 seconds? The reason is because let's say your character has 5 seconds of Combust from SKB, and then you press Combust, you will have 12 seconds. It will just delete the initial 5 seconds. It will just replace it with 12 seconds. This works exactly the same way as many other buffs in the game, like Icy Veins, if any of you ever played. If you have Icy Veins, and then you press Icy Veins, that extra doesn't get added on, right? It just replaces the old one. Same thing with Combust. However, if you have Combustion and then you cast your SKB, it will add on the 6 seconds, right? So typically as fire, what that will end up looking like is where you are hard casting a Pyroblast with SKB, and then near the end of the cast, you will actually press your combustion. And the important is that it's near the end of the cast, not after the cast. Because then the combustion will actually do the 12 seconds, and then like 0.5 seconds later, your pyro finishes, and then it adds on those 6 seconds, right? While that might seem very basic in concept, it's important to know because oftentimes there are situations where you might want to do something like delaying your pyro by your combustion, for like 2-3 seconds, maybe even 5 seconds, just to ensure that you can actually sync up your SKB. It's hard to nail a rule of thumb because obviously this all comes down to like fight timers and like, you know, are you going to lose a use of combust if you do that? You know, it's hard to like just say a concept or rule, but typically speaking, in my opinion, if I'm at 7 stacks of SKB, I will hold my combustion until I get my 8th stack, and then I'll do a Pyroblast. It will feel so much better, especially since anytime you're doing a cast into a combust, you're going to get 2 SKB stacks, right? Because I assume you're going to Fire Blast, Pyroblast, or something like that, right? Which it'll be, you know, like it'll be like Fireball, Combust, Fire Blast, Pyro, Pyro, right? Which is 2 stacks of SKB, so you'll waste 1 anyway. Or you're going to do some variation of that. You're going to waste an SKB stack somewhere, or do something inefficient. Which is why typically, if you're at 7, I like to just hold. If you're at 6, you can just send your combustion if it's ready, because you don't want to hold too long, right? Yeah, I mean, that's basically it for these concepts, these FAQs. I hope this helps. In the third part, I'm going to be deep diving, like a short fight. I already have it recorded. It's like a 4-minute fight that I did on the dummy, and the video stretches to like 25 minutes. There is so much to unpack and so many different situations and scenarios that come. It's a spec that requires immense practice. Most of the high-end mages have been playing this spec since Sanctum of Domination. I've been playing this since Sanctum. You know, we're very experienced with this spec, so we've seen all these scenarios. But if you're new, it's going to be hard to digest everything. That's why I really, really recommend that third one. If you're going to be able to sit down and watch it at all, please do watch that one. I think it's going to show so much. Yeah. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.